Well, think about when you first hear a new song,
Yeah.
you're like, dang, this hits. It's so good. You listen to it on repeat for like a week. And then at the end of that week, you're like, I'm over it. Because you no longer have the contrast of missing it, right? Just like in a relationship, when you're always around that person, it's like, that's not necessarily the healthiest thing in a relationship. Like, you need time away, just like you need time away from a job, even if you're grinding on a mission. You need time away from a relationship to create the contrast of I'm with you, I love you, versus I miss you and I want to see you again. But you cannot have one without the other. You cannot have the light without the dark. The contrast must exist to allow the good thing that you like to exist in its full potential. You must experience the other side of the spectrum.
So, I mean, we got to talk about your shirt first.
My shirt?
Yeah, man. We got a Spartan race, 5K sprint finisher shirt on.
Yeah, we did
Why are
a,
you wearing the shirts?
because it's comfy.
Fire.
We did a Spartan race last weekend with peeps from the gym. And we like to do like team kind of building events, and Spartan race is a great one to do for like fitness oriented people, but just anyone in general. If you don't know what a Spartan race is, it's an obstacle course race. So it's a prescribed distance. So the one we did was a 5K, so it was the shortest one. It was about 3.5 miles. But there's obstacles along the way. So lots of like climbing, hanging, swinging, carrying heavy stuff up hills and things like that, crawling under barbed wire. One of the obstacles is a spear throw. So you have to like stick a spear into this target.
Yeah, that's super cool.
And if you don't make any of the obstacles, you have to do 30 burpees instead of the obstacle if you fail it. So it's like, in some way, you have to like make your way across the obstacle.
You got to pay.
You got to pay your dues. And so it's kind of a fun, physically active way to kind of bond together and get through some stuff like that.
For real. I love that because especially like your gym, like I love how they do a lot of things like that. Like it doesn't feel like a normal gym. And a lot of that has to do with the community aspect of like, hey, we're all going to do hard things. It's going to hurt, but we're going to do it together. So it's like
100%.
Yeah.
It makes it a heck of a lot easier. Well, not easier, but it makes it a lot more.
The mental is easier.
You're a lot more willing to put yourself through things if you have other people going through those things too.
True.
Like,
I wonder why that is. Like, is that some like human, like tribal fairness instinct of like, oh, it's not that bad because it's fair. Whereas like if you had to do it, but I didn't have to do it, you'd be way more upset.
Possibly.
Because it's not fair.
Possibly.
You know?
But I feel like you also have like the support system around you of like, you're not going through this alone. Like there's other people that can help hype you up, that can help push you through obstacles that maybe you're not good at. And you can help people through obstacles that they're not good at.
Yeah.
Because that's,
you connect in with the tribe and cover each other's.
yeah. And that was part of the thing too. Cause it's like, we took our whole staff. And so it's like, there were like 12 of us. And some people were better at a lot of the obstacles. Some people weren't as good at certain parts of the course. And so we were all moving together and making through the course as like one unit, as one group, and helping each other where our shortcomings were. And so that was like a cool part of doing it as a group, as opposed to just trying to race it like one person.
I love that. There's definitely something very real ingrained in us about shared trauma and like the bonds that creates.
Oh, absolutely.
Like some of my closest friends are from shared traumatic, quote unquote, traumatic events. You know, it's not even like, I don't want to like put that all under one umbrella of like, it's traumatic or it's not. You know, I say that kind of jokingly, but it's shared pain. You know, like we all went through the same experience and it wasn't comfortable, but we're better for it. We're closer for it. That's what that means. Trauma is just funnier.
Totally. Speaking of shared trauma,
I'm like a jerk. All right, moving on.
How so you did the Murph with us, on Memorial Day this year.
So you guys
did
the Murph, and that's what's his guy's name? Sergeant Michael Murphy, I think. Yeah, so that's in memoriam of him. He was a Navy SEAL, if I'm speaking correctly. He was basically a war hero, you know, unfortunately passed away in the line of duty in battle. So a lot of people, they'll do this workout, the Murph, named after him in memoriam of him. And what it is just a workout that he used to do a whole bunch. It's one of his favorite things. You run a mile, you do 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, and 300 squats, and then run a mile at the end. And it's just for completion, really, or if you want to time it, it's not like you have to do all in a row. But then it's also supposed to be with a 20-pound weighted vest.
Yeah.
So that adds an extra layer to it. I didn't even have the vest, and it was still very hard. But it is what it is. So yeah, that was really cool. Another kind of those shared painful bonding experiences.
Yeah. You know, another thing we did at the gym with gym peeps, we're seemingly big into the shared trauma thing.
Dude, that's what you do as a gym. You sell pain.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
like that is your product.
Yeah. We sell the ability to try to conquer pain together.
Betterment,
you know,
through pain.
Yeah.
But,
betterment through pain.
Betterment through pain, indeed. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is kind of comes with the territory.
Yeah. You know? Dude, that Murph was rough. That was my first time running it too. I was supposed to run it last year with him, but I was in house jail because I had COVID.
House jail.
But yeah, it was different.
Dude, you did it really fast too.
I did it. I was moving. Yeah, so I ended up finishing in probably about 43, 44 minutes, something like that, which is quick, apparently.
Like, as far as I'm aware, within the Murph community, you know, whatever that means, like sub 40 is like very high level. So if you're getting around the 40-minute mark, especially like first time,
yeah,
like that's pretty good. Because I did it in under an hour. I did it probably about like maybe 10 minutes longer, so maybe like 54, 55 minutes, more or less. But I didn't even have the vest on. So it's like, wait a minute, that do be schmoovin'.
I was schmoovin'. The vest did add another layer for sure. To be fair, I didn't run the first mile with the vest on because
You didn't have to tell them that.
I'm honest.
Thank you for your honesty.
Because I dropped a weight on my toe a few days earlier, and I was kind of worried about that my toe might be broken.
That's also fair.
So I ran it with a potentially broken toe, but
hey man, so if your toe wasn't broken, sub 40 easy, right?
Easy, bro. But I did do the rest of it with the vest on, which
even the last mile was
still tricky.
I think next time we do it, I want to get sub 40. I think it's very doable, and I definitely want to get the vest. It's just something. I think it's just like anything you have to train for.
I think if we trained for it, it would be fine. Like I kind of went in blind.
Right. I mean, pretty much same. Because like I don't run right now, and so like even running the mile was like, oh, this is like this is a thing. This is a non-trivial thing here.
Yeah.
Which is mildly embarrassing, but you know, we're honest here, so it is what it is. But I think if I train for it, like it's bad, but it's also like doable. Like it's something I can see myself doing on a weekly or every like few days, and like not like killing myself kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I want to start adding in, especially like the pull-ups into sort of just like the regular workout routine. Just get really, really good at those.
Yeah.
Because that's honestly, like from my perspective, what it felt like was like I do my pull-ups and then all the other exercises in between. Because I did rounds of like 5 pull-ups and 10 push-ups, 15 squats. Just did that 20 times. And it just felt like, oh man, I just got to get like pull-ups and then rest. And then pull-up and then rest. That's really what it felt like.
Yeah. So honestly, if you trained pull-ups more often and then you sprinkled in some running here and there, you'd probably be fine.
Fire. I love that.
You'd probably be fine.
Yeah.
Especially if you trained like weighted pull-ups, like heavy pull-ups.
That's what I got to get on for sure. Yeah.
And then just sprinkled in some running. Yeah, you'd be chill.
It is also interesting. I'm glad I did it kind of as a baseline with like no prep.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, well, no prep is like I still, work out, I still lift, I'm still like relatively athletic and capable, but no prep for the specific thing, or no prep really for like endurance type activities. I don't really do that as much right now. So it was nice to have as a baseline, and also just to know that like, hey, I can do hard things even if I'm not prepared for it, just because my mind says we're doing this hard thing, and you kind of will yourself to do it.
Sure.
In a way, very like David Goggins-esque, just kind of like, we're doing it.
Yeah,
we're here, we're showing up, kind of thing. And I think there's a lot of value in being able to do that, just for the sake of doing that sometimes, is doing the hard thing, even if it's not optimal, just for the sake of it being hard, that you can actually get a lot of growth out of that.
No, I totally agree. It's like growth sometimes for the sake of growth is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, sometimes you have to be strategic with that.
Well, it's like you're sort of extrapolating the stages of it. Like growth for the sake of growth is valuable because it teaches you what? It teaches you how to grow.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't know how to grow, even if you know what you want to grow in, it's hard because you don't know how to grow. But if you know how to grow, that is a fundamentally ubiquitous principle, I think, like really. Yeah. Oh, 100%. From like zeroth and first principle thinking. So if you then take those lessons that you learned from just learning how to grow by doing hard things all the time, you can apply that to what you want to grow in, and then it becomes a lot easier because now you have a process. You know what it feels like. You've been there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So that allows you to do things that you've never done or even things that other people haven't done. This is sort of where you're playing on the boundary of like what's even possible sometimes is if you know how to grow, you can apply that to anything. So I think there's a lot of value in just that.
No, that's for sure. I think there is obviously like a time and a place to manage your resources in a smart way. Because like
100%.
Just picking a thing just because it's hard in doing it is a strategy to grow, but there might be another strategy to grow that's a little bit more aligned with maybe something that's productive in a direction that you want to go in.
100%. I think too, because that kind of conversation comes up a lot when people talk about like hard work, right? And it's sort of this question of whether or not hard work is good, whether or not it's bad, whether it's useful or not. And a lot of it just becomes based on what your definition is, and also very contextually dependent on the person and why they're doing what they would consider hard work in the first place, right? And the more, I think this most often comes up in like in the workplace, like standard employment, because people think like, oh, the harder you work, like if you work past 40 hours a week, your productivity actually goes down. And sure, there is some evidence to support that on a large scale, but I suspect a lot of that is from data points of people who are doing work for the sake of a paycheck or for the sake of just showing up and doing what they're told and just doing what's sort of expected of them, what they think they should do or think they have to do.
Yeah.
And a lot of those data points are not coming from people who are actually pursuing something that they want to move the needle in, or actually pursuing something that they want to grow and are actually interested in. Because if you're doing something like that, the hard work isn't hard work. Like that's sort of just what's required, right? Like you're just putting in the time required for growth in that area. It's sort of not something that you have to take or leave as like sort of an absolute.
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Like if you're going to spend 40 hours a week working on something that you don't really care about that much, it's going to feel like you have to force yourself to get to that 40 hours just for the sake of getting to the 40 hours. Versus if it's something you love to do, you're passionate about it, you're driven to do it, you could work 60, 70 hours a week and it flies by and you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. Even though the objective difficulty of said work might be the same, your perception of it is way different because you might have like a bigger incentive to do it because you believe in it versus something that you're just doing to do.
Right. It's mission driven, and unfortunately a lot of society is not full of people who are mission driven or very clear on that. Like I believe everyone has the capacity to be mission driven for sure. Like that's something that's pretty fundamental, but not everyone is living their life like that. So of course, people get upset when people talk about hard work because I think they want an excuse for not working hard, or they want some sort of evidence or something to back up this idea that they shouldn't be working harder than they are, right? Because what they're already quote unquote working hard on isn't what they want to be working hard on, or isn't even what they want to spend their lives on. It's just what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
So of course it causes some friction when someone comes along and says, no, hard work is actually what's required. Like if you want to move the needle, like the more you work, the more it gets done. And that's pretty true, I'd say, for the most part, provided that you're working on something that you are actually there to make progress. You're not just there clocking in, clocking out, clicking buttons on and off and doing your job. You're doing a vocation, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, the more you work, the more gets done. That is pretty true.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, especially for the most part, like I would consider myself to be working on things that I believe in and I care about and I enjoy and I love and I'm passionate about. Even then though, like I've noticed if I go too long without some kind of break or without some kind of time away from that thing, I do still feel like I'm kind of spinning my wheels a little bit more than I normally would. And I don't really notice it while I'm in it. I only notice it when I take a step back, take a little break, and then go back into it. I'm like, oh, dang, I was leaving a lot on the table. So I think there still is room to just have the discussion about balance. But balance, I think, looks different for different people, because most people, when they say like work-life balance, right, they mean like a 50-50 split of like, you should only work this hard and then you should take this much time off because it's like some sort of equation-based thing. Whereas, and to your point of like, you can work 70, 80, 90 hours a week and be plenty fulfilled and still be productive if it's something you really want to work on. But I still think there is room to take vacations, take a break, get your mind on other things. One, so that you can kind of replenish your resources to then dive back in kind of harder and better and more productive. But also taking a step back from the things you're working on all the time on the daily gives you a different perspective to come back with, kind of clears your mind, allows you to think clearer potentially on some of these things, allows you to go do other things, let your subconscious kind of work on problems that your conscious brain is trying to solve but has a hard time with. You go take a step back and your subconscious brain kind of chews on it for a while. You come back at it from a new perspective and you're like, oh, dang, got it.
Right.
Send it.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, you're sort of allowing resources to be allocated to different areas of your life and different areas of your mind even, to allow for, like you said, different perspectives or different approaches to come through. And that's also why it's important to experience other things and experience a whole variety and pursue a whole variety of different paths in a sense. So you can have those multiple perspectives to then bring back, if you have like a singular vocation, to then bring back to augment that one thing, right? Yeah. And balance is a tricky word because I prefer the term harmony to harmonize. Like even from a more mathematical physics sense, that kind of vibes a little better for me. It harmonizes better for me because it's all about like resonance. And if you hit the right resonances within the right situations, it will either constructively interfere or destructively interfere, right? If you're talking about waves and things, right? So if you are off balance or at a destructive interference resonance, it's like, well, it all just kind of falls flat, right? Whereas if you balance things right and be in a situation where it's constructively resonant, it's like you can get a feedback loop going and compound and compound and compound. So your results actually end up being way more than you would ever expect with the right harmony and I guess balance in some sense.
Yeah.
But that being said, balance is not 50-50.
Right.
And it's also not static. So one day it might be 50-50. The next day it might be 60-40. Might be 99-1 even. You know, depending on what the day is. It's very dynamic. It's not a static, one size fits all, this is how life should be kind of thing. And I think a lot of people fall into that just as almost an escape from their current situation that they're not fully vibing or resonant with already, right? So anything that's sort of balanced, leaning towards the not working side ends up kind of being in their favor from their perspective, you know?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting conversation, but I think it all just has to do with like the individual, what you're doing, what you require for recovery, and then also managing like burnout, because that's obviously a real thing as well. Even something that you're working at a very high level, very passionate about, very vocationally obsessed about, even you can still experience burnout. Totally. And it really just depends on your resource management. And so it's, I guess, when you're talking about like, oh, when you step away and you come back to things and you're like, oh, how much you're leaving on the table, is that usually on like a larger time frame in terms of like days of doing this kind of thing? Or is it more even of a day to day? Like I worked 3 to 4, maybe 5 straight hours on something, and then I take a break and then come back and realize how much I dropped off after maybe hour 2 or 3.
Both, 100% both. Because like you see it on the micro scale in the terms of you're working for a bunch of hours straight on something, you're super productive, and then you notice maybe your mind starts to wander, or you get a little bit less productive on something. You take a little break, go for a walk, go outside, look at the sun, do, whatever. Don't look at the sun, but you know what I mean.
Stare at the sun. That is what we were advocating. Thank you for our sponsors, LASIK eye surgery.
Yeah. Take a break in some capacity. Come back. And then, like, you're a little bit clearer. You can look at it from a different perspective, from a fresh perspective. Maybe you've been super hyper-focused on a couple of the details of whatever job you're doing, and you come back, and you can now see the whole picture, and you're like, okay, I can see how all the pieces fit together now from a fresh perspective. Again, your subconscious will work on things for you, and you might come back with an answer that you never would have thought of otherwise. But then you also see this on more of a macro scale in like terms of how long you're working, like days, weeks, months on something without really a meaningful break. And the duration of break to work ratio is different for different people. Some people might just need a weekend. Some people might need a week of a vacation or something like that, right? So you're working a long time, you take a step back, maybe you go on vacation, like maybe you take a few days off, a week off, whatever that looks like. You do something unrelated to work. You come back, you have a fresher perspective to now attack that next stint of work for weeks and months.
100%. I think a lot of it, there's definitely the case to be made about, if you're thinking about, okay, what should I optimize for? It's like, well, you should optimize for sort of like having the most energy and then also just feeling good.
Yeah.
In a sense, because that is the state that you'll show up better for the things that you need to show up for. And in some sense, like it sounds selfish on the surface, like, oh, I'm prioritizing me. I'm only doing things that make me feel good.
Yeah.
But that is just sort of the level 1, like base level, what you can control.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I'm focusing on. So then that I know that once I apply a better version of me to a certain problem, it's going to show up better. It's going to be more effective for other people,
Totally.
So it ends up being this very selfless thing as well.
No, I that perspective is awesome. And I think a lot more people are adopting the sort of, I don't know, self-love kind of characteristic, which...
Yes, but a lot of people are doing it, I think, for the wrong reasons, because you don't see them have a larger vocation that they're applying it to. They don't have like a mission. They don't have like like an MTP or like a massively transformative purpose that they're really trying to move the needle on and make an impact on. So it's like, at what point does it become, I'm doing this for me so that I can achieve my purpose better? Or is it, I'm doing it for me because I don't like my job and I'm lazy and I don't want to work?
No, that's a very fair point.
Which that should honestly be an indicator of you're in the wrong job. You should probably look at changing something, because that's not a way to live, in my opinion.
I agree. I totally agree. But I guess even with more people kind of being on the like, it's okay to work on yourself, like, because the analogy that is very easy to see this through is like a cup, like you're a cup, right? And it's like your cup gets full of stress and things, and it overflows if there's too much stuff. But also you can look at the cup as like your energy. If you have a full cup of energy, you can pour out into the world and like make a change and pour your energy into other people and into other projects and things like that. But it's very difficult to pour from an empty cup. And so
it's a flow for sure.
Going back to taking some time off, working on yourself, doing things that fill your cup up so that you can bring a full cup back to the table when you get back to work. But at the same time, I think there are also people, ironically, like sometimes the same people will kind of get on you for not taking time off. For like, if you want to grind, if you want to be in here and be like, you're working too hard, you got to take time for yourself, you can't pour from an empty cup. It's like, yes, that's true. However, everyone's different. And so some people might be able to work a little bit harder, go a little bit longer because they're driven by a mission, something that they really want to push for. And that's okay too.
That is absolutely okay. And in some sense, required for progress sometimes, just in a larger sense. But yeah, the cup analogy is great because it makes you think a lot. Because you're right, you can't pour from an empty cup. But also, what fills your cup is different than what fills my cup.
Totally.
And that is something that you have to have a level of self-awareness and self-exploration for, to really figure out and dial in, to know how you can fill your cup with the right things and also pour out the cup with the right things to leave space for more things to come in. And it's a back and forth kind of flow.
Yeah.
It's never static. And this is why, like, harmony, I think is a better term than balance, because balance sort of implies this static stillness.
I'm balancing,
right?
Static.
Yeah. You're sort of, you've hit a middle point where everything just kind of fits.
Yeah. Harmony is dynamic.
Harmony is inherently dynamic.
Yeah.
Waves do the wiggles.
Waves do the wiggle.
Waves do be wiggling, my guy. So even just like changing the language and the terminology that we use can really have an impact on how we think about things and how we internalize and utilize the tools and the perspectives that we take on.
Yeah.
So I usually tend to focus more on the dynamic side of things, just because it fits a little more with how I find it useful to then bring up in other areas of my life. Totally. Because then it becomes okay that things aren't balanced or things aren't perfect. It's like, well, no, it's just a transient phase. This might be required to set up for this thing. I'm learning this thing. I'm getting better at doing hard things, for example. And it just sort of makes it a whole lot more accepting.
Yeah.
And, you can kind of get into a whole other conversation on, like, I think we talked a lot about it before in other podcasts, of just being able to deal with different situations and in some sense deal with like suffering in a way, or even like pain and how you shouldn't even judge that and whatever. But you can listen to those other podcasts for that, because probably want to like move on to some other things as well. But I think the hard work conversation is a very interesting and individualized conversation, and it just really depends, and it comes back to self-awareness and understanding why you're here, what you want to produce and create in the world, and coming at it from that sort of creative sense in a way is, I think, can be pretty valuable for a lot of people.
Totally. And I mean, you want to talk about like harmony and things. Harmony exists everywhere, obviously, but one of the easiest ways for people to like see like a physical manifestation of harmony is like art.
I think so.
Or music or anything like that, because you have to have the different pieces of the art that harmonize literally together, because it's like you can't just, well, I guess you can just throw a bunch of paint on a canvas and call it art, but
there's a level.
You notice a difference.
There's, I think if you want to extrapolate art to like some foundational elements that kind of like they may or may not have to be there. One of them that I think about a lot is like composition, right? And if you want to frame, now we're looking through the lens of like, oh, everything is art, and you can absolutely make a case for that. Like your work is art, your workout is art, your job is art, this is art, your painting is art, like everything can be some sense sort of like an artistic expression in a creative way of like how you're showing up in the world. And a lot of it has to do with composition, and that is fundamentally an expression of resource allocation. So like you have certain instruments, you have certain sounds, volumes, you have all these levers at play, and what matters is not what's there, but to what extent they are there in relationship to others, right? And painting is the exact same way. What colors do you have? What types of paints do you have? What texture do you have? What background, foreground perspective do you have? What techniques? And it ends up being this whole stylistic mishmash, but with the right composition, you can have paint thrown on a wall art.
Yeah.
If it pulls out those intentional aspects of composition, I think.
Yeah. And how the different elements and variables harmonize together. Because it's like when you think about like an orchestra, there's a bunch of instruments, right? But to your point of to what extent is each instrument present? When is it present? How is it present? What role does it play? You can't just say, go and have every instrument in the orchestra play whatever note they want as loud as possible. It can't be everything at the same level, because it's just this wall of noise and it doesn't sound harmonious and pleasing. But if you have each instrument at slightly different levels, to what extent is the violin playing at the moment? To what extent of volume? What pitch? How fast? they have to harmonize together in terms of tempo, in terms of they have to be in the same key. They can't just all be playing random stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they have these certain principles that they must adhere to, but within that, you can be very creative in how you organize and how you harmonize them together. And that's the art part. It's like how you use the harmony to make an expression of something.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of it has to do with contrast. Contrast is a fundamental relationship that a lot of things experience, especially in artistic expressions.
Mm-hmm.
And forget who said it, but there's an interesting quote about a perspective on music where music is the silence between the notes. You might know you said that or not, but
I don't, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a relatively well-known expression, but it's an interesting viewpoint because it kind of gets you to think like, oh, what is music? Like, what is this art thing? Like, I'm making the noise of the note only to have a relevant and meaningful silence after it. I can't have that silence without the contrast of the non-silence of the note, right?
Yeah.
And it's managing those ratios and those contrasts to an extent throughout the whole melody that ends up producing the harmonious piece of art.
Yeah.
And you can extrapolate those same principles in any form of art. Visual art, sound art, performance art. It's really all the same in a sense from these fundamental principles, right? And remember too, like, because I feel like in a lot of ways I view myself as an artist. Like that's how I see most of the things that I do, from martial arts, kind of in the name, from actual like performing arts to just normal art, like traditional like painting. I've always kind of had an artistic sense and an artistic presence about like why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, you know, if you just want to bring it back to the ubiquitous painting or drawing things as art, one of the things that was hammered home into me in all the art classes I've ever taken was contrast. Always contrast. Like you don't draw a shape or you don't draw an object in your piece by lines, like hard lines. Like you can if it's stylistic, but that's like kind of, you have to be very intentional about that as well. But you do it by contrast. It's like I don't draw a hard line on the box, or if I'm drawing like a vase, I don't draw a hard line on the edge of the vase to denote, hey, this is different from the wall behind it. It's like, no, I shade the vase a different value or a different color and a different extent of light and dark relative to what's behind it or what's in front of it. And that defines the boundaries. It's like literally the principle of contrast defining the boundaries of reality was hammered home so many times in physical art.
Well, if you think about it, like, even if you did hard lines, the contrast between the line and the paper,
it's still there.
The boundary, because if you took a black canvas, drew on it with a black marker, did all your shading in all black,
you get modern art.
You would get still a black canvas.
You get painting that you sell for too much money.
Yeah, but it still exists as just a black canvas. Like the contrast defines the reality of what the painting is. The contrast defines reality in every sense too.
It has potential. Is there not art in the latent potential? It's just not there yet.
So the canvas is art.
Canvas can be, I guess.
Yikes. So to your point of contrast, right? It's a contrast. We've talked about the idea of a spectrum all the time, and contrast defines a spectrum. It's like one end versus the other end. The difference between the two defines the difference of the spectrum. And it's like the notes in the symphony, the art on the canvas, shading is an expression of a spectrum, darker or lighter, right? It's not black and white. It's somewhere in between, darker, 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 lighter, 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 to create the three-dimensional effect of the shading and the lighting and all those things together. The notes in a symphony, it's not the violin is either on or off, right? It's like that would just be this beeping noise. It'd be like, beep, beep. But you have different expressions of what the violin can do across a spectrum, and it's contrast of from loud to soft, high pitch, low pitch. You have these different contrasts that create these spectrums that you can move within, but it is the contrast of no noise to loud noise that creates the expression of the instrument and creates the expression of the art itself.
I think too, kind of especially with music, one of the reasons why it's so valued is because it's fleeting, because it's not always there. You know, it's just sort of the impermanence of listening to something, and then the next moment it's not there. It's like now you have a macro scale contrast of this thing made me feel a certain way, and now it's not, and then I still value it for what it was able to do.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't really have that if you would become desensitized if you had just like music all the time.
Well,
you know?
think about when you first hear a new song,
Yeah.
you're like, dang, this hits. It's so good. You listen to it on repeat for like a week. And then at the end of that week, you're like, I'm over it. Because you no longer have the contrast of missing it, right? Just like in a relationship, when you're always around that person, it's like, that's not necessarily the healthiest thing in a relationship. Like you need time away, just like you need time away from a job, even if you're grinding on a mission. You need time away from a relationship to create the contrast of I'm with you, I love you, versus I miss you and I want to see you again.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot have one without the other. You cannot have the light without the dark. The contrast must exist to allow the good thing that you like to exist in its full potential. You must experience the other side of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to have that spectrum in your relationship, in your job, in art, in everything.
100%. No, that's a very, very wise point to be able to extrapolate that to other areas of life as well. But and that's kind of what I mean when I say like a lot of things can be considered art, and a lot of what I do is considered art, because if you just kind of put on that artist hat, little French one, you know, and and you can start seeing things as like, oh, how is this art? Like asking yourself that question, like, how can this be art?
Yeah,
and it really fundamentally changes how you look at things too. You're like, oh, this is art. In a way, it kind of becomes a little less, you take things less seriously in a way, because like, oh, this is just, it's up to me how this thing goes, this painting goes, this artistic expression goes, because I'm the artist, you know?
Yeah.
And it puts a lot more kind of control and responsibility kind of back on you, which a lot of times you might feel overwhelmed because you don't have that. But now it's just like, oh, it's just art of how I respond to this thing, how I do this thing, how I show up in the world. And it also takes away a lot of the pressure, because it's just, oh, it's just another art piece, you know?
Yeah. Well, because I mean, you think about like any field, not just a traditional art field like painting or music or sculpting or anything like that, but anyone outside of that who's really, really good at their craft, what do people call them? Artiste, an artist. Like, oh, dang, that, I don't know, that soccer player, like he's such an artist on the field, right?
It's almost like that term is reserved for a higher level of mastery that transcends the scope and the impact of just the thing that they're doing, like the sport that they're doing or the job that they're doing.
Because you're doing it at such a high level that it's beautiful to behold. And why is it beautiful to behold? Well, probably because it's harmonious. All the different pieces play well together. It's smooth and it's easy on the eye. It's easy on the ear. It's just easy to see.
It just flows.
And that's like no struggle. Humans are attracted to harmony, right? It's like this magnetic thing that we're attracted to, because if something is quote unquote dissonant, or what I would maybe consider the opposite of harmonious would be something dissonant, where they don't play well together. Like if you play on the piano, like if you hit like all the notes together, there's like some of them that just don't quite sound right? And it's because there's some dissonance in the wave frequencies. But long story short, there's a lack of harmony. And so that in itself is a spectrum of dissonance, harmony, right? But I think we are more attracted to the harmony side. And so when you have someone who is, you know, not really good at a skill, it's like they're kind of clumsy, they're not really smooth with things. It doesn't really look that great. But if you have somebody who is master, it looks great, because everything is in harmony. All the pieces play well together and it's harmonious.
Harmony it comes with a sense of effortlessness in a way.
Yep.
To where things they look easy, but you know it's not. And I think that's sort of the threshold that you have to cross in order to be like ubiquitously considered an artist. Is when people are like, wow, I know that's hard, but you make it look so easy.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I wonder too if it's because you can obviously be an artist by doing things that maybe aren't new, maybe aren't super innovative, but you're doing it in a way that expresses mastery, right? But where does that where do you think that the place of innovation comes in? where maybe it's not effortless because it's uncharted territory. You haven't done this before.
Right.
No one's done this before. It's new. And that is sort of a necessary expansion for artistic expression, I think. But a lot of times maybe it doesn't look like that effortless flow of an artist. Well, so where does that come from?
I think because like even if you have an artist who, like a master artist who puts out this painting that's beautiful and incredible and harmonious, that's all you see. You don't see the messy process leading up to it. You simply see the harmony when it is harmonious. You don't see what it takes to create harmony, moving from dissonance to harmony. And so I think, to your point of somebody who's creating something from the ground up, something new, something innovative, you're going to start with a lot of dissonance because you don't know exactly what you're doing. Not everything is going to play well together. But as you start to move through that process, you start to see harmonies emerge and you start to clear away the dissonance and leave what is harmonious together. And so that process of harmonizing is the art process.
Yeah.
I think that's fundamentally the process of art is harmonizing, is finding harmonies.
It's a dynamic convergence.
It's a dynamic convergence.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that you're right. The whole process. Yeah. Obviously the end product is art. It's mastery. It's something.
It is a piece of art.
Yeah, it is a
art is the process of harmonizing from dissonance.
I like that. That's actually a really interesting perspective on that word. Like if you look at a piece of art, it's not just because it's a singular thing, but it is a part of a larger whole of art. Like that whole process of art.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said about those who can master that process and then apply it to other areas as well. You know, to be able to, hey, I mastered this thing. I went through this harmonizing convergent process of art in this thing. Maybe I made a painting out of it. Well, what if I take the same kind of process and apply it to, maybe I made a cool robot out of it, or maybe I made a song. And I think there's a lot of value in art for the sake of that alone, even if you're not an artist. Like I know a lot of people who don't consider themselves creative, and it hurts a little bit when I hear that, like, oh, I'm not creative. And I was like, you're done. You just shot yourself in the back of the head before you even started. I'm like, come on, man.
Yeah.
But like you are creative because they may not be creative because they don't think of what they're doing as a creation process, but they might be an incredible software developer. It's like, that is an incredibly creative process. You are making value.
Creating.
Making value when something didn't exist there before. Yeah. That's fundamentally creative. And that's really how I view business and entrepreneurship, as sort of like a pinnacle activity of creativity, because you're providing a real value to real people, solving a real inefficiency in a market that wasn't there before.
You are creating harmony from dissonance.
You're harmonizing convergent into harmony from dissonance. Exactly, 100%.
Yep. Now, I'm not saying dissonance is always bad. Pieces of dissonance here and there, because think about like jazz.
It's
jazz.
Well, it's
for a second.
It's we're going to get to that in a second, but it's the necessary contrast for harmony to appear.
Exactly.
So it's like, yes, exactly. I welcome the dissonance in a way.
Yeah.
And that is what people do in these creative processes. They actually seek out the dissonance, because you seek out the problem in a way. You seek out the opportunity for harmony to occur.
Correct.
Because harmony can't occur where harmony already is. It's not like you can... You can optimize, but it's not like you can harmonize harmony in a way. Like, maybe that might be a simplistic way to think of it, but it makes sense. You can harmonize dissonance because there's contrast there. There's opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's just reframing things, not only just from an artistic perspective, but just from a useful life perspective of dissonance or problems or hardship is an opportunity for you to actually do the thing that you want to do and gain fulfillment from it.
Which is why, bringing it full circle, doing hard things is productive and grows you, because you are creating harmony from dissonance.
Harmony from dissonance.
You struggle with something. You cannot do it. The pieces don't play well together. You're not smooth at it. You're not good at it. But you work on it. You practice. You grow. You get better at the thing by doing it more, to a point where you become proficient at it. You are creating harmony from dissonance. So like something like a Spartan race. Something like doing the Murph for the first time. A little rough the first time because there's a lot of dissonance. You don't know what you're doing. It's difficult.
But you get good.
And you start to create harmony from dissonance. You start the artistic process of creating something of value that was not there before in your own life. Harmony from dissonance.
It's just sort of that like ordo ad chaos, order out of chaos idea.
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder, if that's just sort of like a fundamental human thing to sort of want to defy entropy. Because from a thermodynamic perspective,
Interesting.
entropy is sort of this natural progression of things into disorder. It's sort of like this law of the universe, like, well, everything decays, everything proceeds to become less harmonized, less ordered into chaos. Exactly.
Interesting.
It's sort of this, like, I wonder where that comes from, this human drive to order things back up and defy entropy in a way, like control of the environment.
Yeah, I wonder if that's why we like art and why we like harmony is because it's like fighting the dissonance in a way. It's like you're reversing the process of natural order moving from harmony to dissonance.
And not to say, though, that we're like violating the second law of thermodynamics here by just making the painting or whatever. It's like, well, no, it's resource allocation. It's like you're expending energy to converge onto this harmony, and that has to come from other things. It's like maybe you create entropy in other areas of your life. And it's all about this sort of harmonious
And that's
balancing act that's very dynamic.
that's kind of why it takes energy to make art, is because you have to go the other direction. Like the flow of the normal river is from harmony into dissonance, into entropy, right? Into chaos. And so you have to expend energy to swim upstream and
Push that
create
box up the hill.
harmony.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, there's a lot of harmony that exists in the world, in the natural world especially, and this is where you get a lot of your inspiration for art and things like that, is because you can see the harmony in nature. And so that still kind of exists, but
is harmonious because that is sort of like the natural, effortless progression. So if you look at, I don't know, I did a little bit of like chaos theory in college, which I would not say I'm an expert at all because it's hard and I don't quite understand all of it.
Right.
But the idea is, it can be pretty beautiful and very interesting to look at because it feels unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know, in a chaotic system, if you want to define a system chaotically, it's a system that is highly dependent on initial conditions, right? So like, let's say like a pendulum, it's not a chaotic system because if I pull the pendulum back by like 1 degree of rotation or like a little bit higher, it's still going to be very predictable. It's going to trace out the same motion. Nothing changes really.
Yeah.
It's like it's not very sensitive. It's a predictable. It's a very predictable. And just because I change the initial conditions just ever so slightly, it's not going to change how it turns out like 5, 6, 7 to 10 plus cycles later. Right. Or like a chaotic system can be like a double pendulum. And I'm not talking about like small rotations. I'm talking about like a big one. Like if I pull the thing way back up here and I let that thing go, it's going to create this very chaotic thing that's very, very hard to predict, very hard to mathematically model. But it looks really interesting because it's unpredictable. It's like there's sort of some excitement to it because I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
It's not predictable. It's not boring, right?
There's some order to it.
But there is because it's a physical system, right?
Yeah.
And the reason this is a chaotic system is if I change the angle of one of the pendulums or this or that or whatever, just a little bit, just a tiny bit, the state of the system 10 cycles later looks very different than the original system did 10 cycles later. And that's sort of this chaotic system where if you change the starting point just a little bit, the outcome later on is vastly different.
Well, think about this. If you set off like a small explosive, like a firecracker or something like that, or something that like makes smoke, like a smoke bomb firework, right? You can set off the exact same smoke bomb firework in exactly the same spot, but the subtle differences in the construction of it or the wind at any given time, you can set 2 in a row. The smoke cloud that it makes looks vastly different.
Yeah.
It's still a smoke cloud. Like you can still tell it's a smoke cloud. The shape of it might be similar, but the intricacies of the cloud itself is vastly different than if you set another smoke bomb off 3 seconds later. Because the initial conditions are
firecrackers
subtly different to where the smoke in the real world is a chaotic system.
It's a different environment.
It's a chaotic.
Like that other quote that I can't remember who said it, but like no man can step in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man. You know, it's like things change, naturally change. And there's a beauty in that as well. So there's some sort of beauty in the chaos and also maybe accepting the entropy because, and this is why I think that humans, it's an interesting thought. Like maybe humans are drawn to like destruction or like things that like blow up. Like why do we like that? You know, because that is what creates the opportunity to harmonize. That is what allows us the opportunity to fight against the entropy. Because if everything was perfect and harmonizing, what would we do?
It would be boring,
right? So I don't know. Maybe that's the purpose of life is to like defy entropy. I don't know. Maybe that's an interesting way to think about that. But and that's like why we like things that destroy, because it is now presenting an opportunity to build back up again.
Interesting.
And in a sense too, it's like if you want to kind of follow that thread down a little bit, and linger there a while, destruction is no different than creation. Destruction is creation of a different state. Just like creation is, I take something that was in this state and maybe I reorder it.
Just a state change.
And now it's in this state. It's just a state change. Whereas destruction is, now it's in this one and I reorder it. And who's to say that new destroyed state, it looks like it's unharmonious, but what if that's a new harmony?
Here's an example. Destruction being creation.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make a sculpture?
I mean, like,
how do you make
like
chisel sculpture?
Yeah, you take away, you destroy something. Yeah.
You destroy it in a very specific way,
but that unleashes the creation.
You know, there's some sort of quote, I forget exactly what it is, but it's like every block of stone has a statue waiting to be
that was probably
or something like that, like a
Michelangelo quote. I think like that. This is probably something like carving David, or like I basically had to like set him free. I saw David in the stone and I had to set him free, right? And
yeah.
You have to do that through a destructive process.
Yeah.
And this is why like self-improvement is like, yes, an ordering process, but it's also a destructive process because you're destroying who you were before to create who you are today. You know, and this happens continually. And destruction and creation and life and decay and life and death even. And it's like, it's not actually different because every part is required for the next part. And this is actually very interesting if you look at it biologically. It's like decay actually exists as an extant form of life because decay only happens because of things like fungi or bacteria or the like decomposer type organisms causing that process, causing that foray into entropy.
Well,
but it's actually ordering them up. It's like you're
literally the circle of life.
You're reallocating resources from something that was ordered and harmonious. Now it's entropic. That's not a word, but it's chaotic now. It goes through the process of entropy, and it shifts that energy into something that now reorders itself and builds itself up as an organism in a harmonious way that almost defies entropy. So I don't know. The entropy conversation is a very interesting way to look at it, and
because I think entropy, the idea of entropy definitely exists, especially on like a macro view of things over a broad time scale. But you can have cycles of entropy into life again, like order, chaos, order, chaos, order, chaos, order, chaos.
It's not all a closed system. The idea of entropy is like, in a closed system. It's like, well, that's crazy and all, but a lot of times the systems and the boundaries between them, closed or open, aren't clear.
Right.
And sometimes it's not even useful to think about it like that. It's like, well, I can now understand it from this useful artistic perspective of I am ordering chaos. I am harmonizing dissonance. I am converging on this harmonious piece, part of the process as like a vectorized goal.
Yeah.
But I also have to accept that, well, that's not permanent. And it's sort of the process of like, you know, when I won the game, it's like, why would I keep playing the game? It's like I've made that piece of art. It's like, well, now time to destroy and leave room, empty the cup for a new process to begin and fill that cup up again.
Yeah. The balance of just realizing that order and chaos, entropy, and life and death and creation and destruction, it all exists on the same continuum.
Really, it does.
And you're just cycling through it based on what you need at a certain time. Like
what you need at a certain time, also like what you are called to and want to express. Because there's an interesting concept. Have you heard of like shuhari?
Yeah.
So that is a pretty it's a Japanese concept. I feel like we've kind of thrown a lot of Japanese concepts in here as well, but it's sort of this idea of like when you are on your path to mastery, there are sort of three major stages, and these are kind of broken up into like shu, ha, and ri, all together one word, shuhari. The first one is sort of when you are an apprentice, the shu stage or whatever, when you are sort of observing, you're copying, you're learning the fundamentals, just sort of as a student, right? So you might copy how your master does something or your mentor does this thing. You're observing and you're replicating, and until you can replicate, you really have no authority to iterate or try to innovate or do anything new with it because you don't know the fundamentals. You haven't mastered the basic yet. So that's sort of that first stage, just mastering the basic, getting fundamentals.
Yeah.
In the middle stage, the ha part, I think it means something about like breaking free or exploring. It's like now you are sort of breaking the rules a little bit and going away, try to expand, playing with different things, seeing how far you can take certain aspects, but still kind of working with the fundamentals, but now you're experimenting them in different ways and kind of playing with the rules. And through that, you're finding your own style. The last part, is about transcending. It's about now you know your craft well enough, you've become a master of your craft enough that you are now adding to the conversation and creating and putting in new things that did not exist before. Everything else is just kind of like playing with the bounds and connecting the dots of what was there. This final stage of mastery is when you are able to transcend those rules and actually add in your own version of them and add to the conversation, create something new, right? And you see this sort of process through so many areas of mastery, from like artists and athletes and entrepreneurs and anything that involves sort of this artistic, creative, harmonizing process. You kind of see these stages. And it's a very interesting, I think it's very useful to kind of look at it and be like, okay, where am I? Maybe there's something that I want to master. If I know that, now I kind of have a little bit of a more of a structure in place. So I'm like, okay, I can know when the time is to do certain things and kind of what the proper thing is. Because it's like, it's sort of almost futile to jump to the end stage when you haven't even mastered the fundamentals. Like a lot of people want to do that. But that's really kind of what causes like burnout, because they don't know what they're doing. They don't have anything. You can't build your pyramid with no foundation, right? It's like, you're just going to put a pinnacle on the ground. It's like a tiny little pyramid, It's like, it doesn't really work. You got to build your base, right? If you want to build a bigger pyramid or truly master that, it's like, you got to master those fundamentals and understand, okay, when can I start playing with those a little bit and stretching the boundaries and still kind of like experimenting, finding my own style, finding my own groove, and then harmonizing the way that I want to. And then the final stage I don't think it's something you should aspire to consciously. It's just something that will happen naturally as you master your process and as you master your craft. You'll sort of get these ideas that it's time for that now. And it's just being expressed through you. It's time for that idea to come out, and you can't help but bring it out into the world. And it sort of happens in this sort of harmonious, natural way, instead of you trying to force it.
It's like
it's an allowing.
It's an allowing. It's like a connect the dots picture, where it's like at first you got to connect the dots in the way that they tell you to learn the rules of the system. Once you do that, then you can connect the same dots in different ways to make a unique picture. But then that third step is you make your own dots, add dots to create this whole new picture that never would have existed before without you going outside the boundaries.
Some people don't even need the dots.
You got to learn the rules, and then you can start to bend and break the rules, and then you can start to make your own rules.
Exactly.
But you got to potentially kind of follow that order.
It's like, people, we talked about boxes a lot before. It's like people like, are inside the boxes or whatever. And then people tell you, oh, think outside the box. It's like, oh, that's kind of like the second stage. It's like, well, I want to make my own box.
Well, because that's the thing. It's like, it's not necessarily, a lot of people are like, and I kind of used to say this a lot, was like, there is no box. Well, if there is a box, you've just made the box a lot bigger to where now you can encompass the things outside of the original box. But there's always going to be boundaries on your own physical and human limitations. So there always is some box. It's just, how big is that box? What shape is that box? Because it might not be a square box.
I think the ability to create and destroy boxes is important as well.
Sure.
Because what if I'm in this huge box? Oh, there's no box. But what if I want to put myself under certain creative constraints? And actually, oftentimes, ironically, those are the places where most creativity happens, is when you have a little bit of constraints.
Totally.
And limited resources, and you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to make this thing work with this, right? And there we can talk forever on examples of that, but we won't today. And then, but also making sure that you don't make a box that you trap yourself inside. So there's sort of a management of being able to create and also destroy. Because if you can create, you can destroy, because they're not different. But a lot of people don't understand how to manage that power from all aspects and be able to use it to serve them, right? And I think that's kind of the key difference. Is a lot of times people can create boxes and then they get inside the box and then they can't get out of the box because they don't know how they got in the box in the first place, and then they can destroy, or they can't destroy the box and set themselves free. They can't empty their cup, kind of cycle back to that analogy as well. So being able to fill your cup, pour out your cup, drink your cup, smash your cup, put your cup back together, like with those cool little like gold linings, like cool like Japanese art. I don't know. We're going off a little bit. It's a cool way to understand the beauty of, creation and destruction, because you wouldn't be able to make that cool little like fill in all the cracks with gold and make this really cool art piece without destroying something.
Hence contrast
And convergent harmonies and divergent harmonies and this and that, whatever. It's like, it's not one or the other. It is all.
It is the harmony of all.
The meta harmony. We're making up words. We're doing it live. Let's go.
That's it. All right. Well, I gotta get out of here.
Fair enough.
But
well, I'm glad I showed up today. Over-caffeinated, hopefully underwhelmed.
Wonderful.
Probably cut that one out.